I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Visitor Network TV. Our guest today is a gentleman by the name of Crocker Snow. I was trying to think how to describe you, and I came up with the Laird of Muskeget. Does that work?
I like that. I could give you a couple others too.
Well, that's all right. What?
Duke of Ipswich.
Duke of Ipswich. Well, yeah, but this...
No, the Laird of Muskeget works.
Yeah, you have a little more claim to that title,
yeah,
right?
I do.
Tell us about Muskeget and how you came to be involved.
That's a pretty simple story. My father was a very enterprising guy. He was brought up in Cape Cod. Mm-hmm. I was moving to north of Boston with my mother after the war, and he wanted to keep something going in the Cape and the islands. Mm-hmm. And he loved the water and loved hunting and all that thing. And he knew the Holgates because he was the commissioner of aeronautics for Massachusetts. Knew Alan Holgate. Alan brought him out to Muskeget to go duck hunting. He fell in love with the place and then started talking to people of who actually owned this. And he was told quickly, well, these people in Philadelphia own them and they won't sell it, so forget about it. And Dad was pretty perseverant. Mm-hmm. And he would fly down to Washington on his work in his own plane, and he would several times stop at Philadelphia to go out to lunch with these elderly gentlemen. Mm-hmm. And said, I know you don't want to purchase to buy it, but if you ever change your mind, think about me. As things go, within 5 months they called him mm-hmm. and said, we're too old to get there, and you seem like a nice guy. And so he got the island in with two other gentlemen with the idea that the last living would keep it mm-hmm. in 1947. And I first...
How much, if I might ask, how much?
15,000 total, 5,000 of each.
Yeah.
And I actually first landed out of a Piper Cub there the next June. Dad dropped me and then flew back here to get some gear mm-hmm. to Nantucket and left me there with my best friend. We were about 9 years old, and it felt like Hitchcock's movie Birds. We were scared to death. There were herring gulls everywhere mm-hmm. diving at us and everything else. At that point, there were 20,000 herring gulls. It was the biggest rookery of herring gulls in the East Coast. Mm-hmm. And that's how it started. And I've been going there ever since, so 65 years.
What have been the biggest changes?
Well, one is just the erosion and the profile of the island has changed dramatically. And you can see it on Google Earth Engine if you can just see it mm-hmm. year by year. But that's one huge thing. The second is the species that I am very interested in that sort of dominate the island, if you put it that way, are changing tremendously too. I mean, it was the biggest rookery for herring gulls. There's reasons why that changed, and now there probably aren't 200 herring gulls in the whole island. There were an awful lot of terns at different times. At one point, 200,000.
Wow.
That's a while ago. Mm-hmm. Then the blackbacks and all that, and then the laughing gulls, the terns are gone. So you can see that kind of thing. There is a unique species there that you may know about.
Muskeget vole, is it?
Yep, the Muskeget vole. The real others call it the Muskeget mice, mm-hmm. But it used to be very ubiquitous, and you could pick one up. They were quite tame. It was mm-hmm. like being in the Galapagos Islands. And now, for the last 2 years, they're there, but it's hard to find them. Mm-hmm. And I think I know why, but
What's your guess?
Well,
maybe educated guess.
Well, two things. One is the sea level rising, because the island, the highest point of the island is less than 15 feet above mm-hmm. high tide. And more of the storm tides are hitting the whole island, other than the top.
Wash over.
Yes. Yeah. And I've seen it, and I've been there with it.
What's the approximate size?
It's, think of something a mile long and a half mile wide. Mm-hmm. Another way to think about it is 250 acres, give or take. So I think it's sea
Level
seepage. I think, and this
Do they burrow? They're burrowing?
No, they cannot burrow. I just learned that down here in Nantucket. I've been going back into the books. No, they cannot burrow, so they're on the surface in little tunnels that you see under the poison ivy. And they were almost wiped out from the island when a caretaker back in the turn of the century, the previous century, took 2 cats there. And within 2 years, they were only found on this tiny little offshore island. A scientist got there, found them, got the cats out, and that's the story. But the other thing that's much more complicated and controversial, I have been very, as a steward of the island, so to speak, we've been very, very impacted negatively by the invasion of the gray seals. They are the dominant species there now.
When
by
did they start?
far.
When did they start coming to the island?
Well, they've always come to the island. I've looked back into the history books, and I mean the natural history books, and there were 15 to 20 gray seals up or down, ebbed and flowed, but in that amount till, I mean, really, it's just been very small numbers until really 1995. At that time, there were 19 there, known by the researchers. Each one had a name. You know, there's Essie and there's Penny and that kind of thing. Today, as we speak today, there are roughly 10,000. So it's been from 19 to 10,000 in 20 years.
How big an area do they cover?
In the island? Well, all of these things are fascinating questions. They typically, gray seals typically migrate to Sable Island. These are not migrating. Typically, they only go a little bit beyond high tide to birth and then to breed. So if you think of this as the island, and these are the beaches, they might be 50 yards in the beach grass, typically.
On half the circumference?
The entire island.
The entire island.
Any part of the island, you find them. What has happened in the last 4 years, and I think I know why, but they're going more and more inland. You can find them 200 yards, 300 yards in, scattered.
They don't get poison ivy?
Well, they do, and that's why I don't like them. But I've also found them, and now the scientists acknowledge all this, in the 2 freshwater ponds that are inside in the island. And I think they've got a very negative impact there, which I can explain. But the simple thing to tell anybody is, and tell you, is that it's gone from 19 or 20 to 10,000.
In 15 years.
And
or 20 years.
A lot of people somehow mistake gray seals with, probably don't in Nantucket, but mistake harbor seals and gray seals. They're almost a different animal completely. Gray seals, the cows go between 350 to 500 pounds, and the bulls go to 800 pounds.
These are not the seals we see on the jetties.
No, they are the ones.
They're
that
the harbor. They're the harbor seals.
Yeah, those are harbors. They're big animals, and the other, and they're ugly. They're called horse heads because their profile is like a horse, like a Mongolian horse. And the other thing that I've observed, and now the scientists from MIT and Woods Hole and all these places that were over there last week, is that they become much more aggressive, including towards humans, at least out at Muskegon. And they're going farther inland. They're on the island for more weeks of the year, and they're getting.
Is that because they don't migrate?
They don't know yet. My assumption is that because I think everybody knows now that the only predator that the great seal has is a great white shark.
Right.
And the reason there are so many around Monomoy is because there's deep water and then shallow water. They are not around Muskegon because there's so much shoal. And I think that consciously, unconsciously, they've figured it out. And the word's gotten out, hang here. There's no threat, and you don't have to migrate all the way to Sable Island, which typically gray seals do.
That's a good hike.
It is a good hike. And they go by certainly great whites in the the elbow of the Cape. So that's what I have sort of speculated to the scientists, and in the last 2 years the scientists are being more and more respectful of me, and more saying, some of these things you've been saying we agree with now. And they've sort of come to saying, I'm a layman, I'm a journalist, and I'm observant, but I'm not a scientist. And I've always pointed that out to them, and they've started to say, look, your observation over 65 years in many, many ways is more valuable than us going there for 3 weeks with our test tube. So, back to your question, the dominant species there now is the gray seals.
How does that compare, excuse me for interrupting, how does that compare to the colony at Great Point?
Great Point supposedly has about 200 right now.
All right. So that's a huge...
Oh, it's not even close.
Yeah.
No. It's not close, and Monomoy it's quite remarkable. And several other things I'd say. Up until really 2 months ago, the experts from Woods Hole and the others from NOAA did not want to acknowledge how many seals were on Muskeget. And I'm part of a group here called the Seal Abatement Coalition. And I was speculating because they were speculating that there were 5,000. All of a sudden they gave to me, and they did an overflight constantly last year and last January 15th, and got all these tiny little pictures, put them together, and one person that I know started counting the pups. And I think they knew it, but they didn't acknowledge this until 6 weeks ago to me. They found 3,000 pups on one day on the island, which means, number one, that means roughly 9,000 total, counting the adults. And a lot of pups hadn't yet been born.
When do the pups first go in the water?
The life cycle on a gray seal is this. They're in the water on the shoals and fishing and screwing around most of the year. They hit the beaches like Muskeget. If you're there in the summer, you'll see them in the water, but you won't see them on the island. Maybe a couple, but nothing.
Like as here, you see them every once in a while on the beach.
That's the same thing. Their cycle is that they want to give birth at the most remote and coldest, most remote place they can find when it is the most remote, i.e. in the coldest weather. I think it's the cold weather, not the remoteness, but they've always, I've read a lot about them, and they go for the most isolated places they can find, and that's why Muskeget always had them. They used to, when I first started seeing big numbers, they hit the island in early January, and they were gone by end of February. And the process, which you asked about, is the cows go on, they give birth to the pups, they stay with the pups for roughly 3 weeks, then they're ready to leave the pup on its own, and then the bulls come on and they want to breed. So it all happens in the same period. Now they're hitting the island by mid-December, and they're not leaving. Some of them are not leaving. Big numbers are not leaving until well into March, because it's just gotten too crowded. And it's the territorial imperative, I think, and the orphanage is too crowded. I think. And the scientists say, we've got no other. You've got to be right about that. I will also tell you that, because I was a little shocked about this, and the scientists were. Last January, I arrived with them, from Nantucket. We hit the beach, and there was seals everywhere. There's smell everywhere because of afterbirth and blood. And there's fights going on between the bulls, and some of the bulls kill the pups. It's like it's a riot.
Not in a fun way.
No. It's kind of a low key war, but it's amazing to see. And it used to be, to me, definitely, you hit the beach, and if a seal was 8 yards away, as soon as you were going in, they'd hit the water. They were quite shy. They weren't aggressive, even the bulls. And they're big. They're like a walrus. But they just did not hold excuse me, they wouldn't hold their where they were. They'd clean out. When we arrived last January, there were a lot of seals around, and they weren't moving quite as much as I was used to. And there were 2 adults and 1 pup on the porch of our house, our camp. And the camp at that point was, I don't know, 70 yards, 60 yards from the sea. I'd never seen them they had to get up to get there. I'd seen them under the house. There was 2 adults and a pup on the porch. And
they'd moved in.
Well, exactly. But I went up towards it and went up on the edge of the porch, and I thought right away they'd clear out. And they didn't. And they did not want to the point that I got into our camp and got a long oar. And one of the scientists that are very, they're very careful about this because you're not supposed to do anything. They're protected. He helped me, and he said, I've never seen anything like that. And we really had to prod them off the... I'd never seen that before. And I think it is a little bit of a precedent that there's too many. They're getting... I don't know whether the word is cockier and cocky. I don't know whether that's the right word, but...
or possessive in the sense of their space.
No, I mean, they feel as though this is our space, not you. What are you doing here?
Well, but I mean, even from other seals, might they react the same way if other seals tried to get up there?
That I don't know. One thing that's characteristic to gray seals that people may not know is that the bull typically has a small harem, maybe 5 or 6 cows. And where I've seen them, I've definitely seen the big bulls fighting. A lot of the big bulls have scars at this time of year. There's blood, and you see them fighting on the beach or in the water, in the shoal water. Right. But I have also started seeing, and at first I was sort of shocked, but I'm not now, is that I've seen bulls go up to a cow, want to mate. For whatever reason, the cow didn't want to. Typically because it was still with its pup and it wasn't quite ready to leave the pup. And I've seen the bulls just flop over to the pup and kill it, throw it up in the air. I mean, the bulls are huge. Just sort of what you've seen on TV about some lions and the Serengeti and stuff.
So what's the future?
Of what? Muskegon or the seals or me?
Both, all 3.
Well, I'm doing a book on the sort of 65 years of Muskegon, mostly writing about the dynamic species change. And my last chapter is the most wanted, Muskegon's list of the most wanted criminals. And I've come to the conclusion that, well, you're not going to like part of it, but number 1 is the nerd scientists. There are too many of them that want to go out there and they don't talk to each other. But I'm being fun with that. Number 2 is absolutely the gray seals. But ultimately it's sea rise. There's no doubt that the real threat for the island, and maybe within 150 years, given what's happening, it won't be there. It's on the moraine that Nantucket and Tuckanuck is, but it is very, very fragile. There's not a tree on the island, although this last fall we saw this little willow, and I'd never seen a tree there. So it's now a 1-tree island. But I think the gray seal thing... An
invasive species, if you will.
I know. So I am too. But I think the gray seals are really having an impact on the other species, not just the shellfish. I mean, there used to be a lot of scallops there. They're just not there. There's no lobsters there anymore, and there used to be.
Well, they eat them, don't they?
Yeah, they eat them all.
Yeah.
And there's very few sport fishing there because despite what other people say, I'm convinced that they're taking all the shiners and the other bait fish that the sport fish eat. I happen to.
Is there a limit? I mean, there's got to be a limit to their growth. What it is, we don't know, but clearly.
Well, you're asking a very complicated question.
Right.
One, because they're protected.
No, but I meant more from a food habitat standpoint,
of course.
Food and
no,
disease and everything else.
I understand your question. 6 or 8 years ago, the scientists that I talked to, when they were up to 2,000, they said, well, they're about to hit the
wall.
They're going to
hit the wall.
And the chances are there's going to be a lot of disease. Well, now it's 10,000. And I keep going to scientists, I could say individually, because I've gotten to know them well and I know the ones I trust and the ones I don't. One of the women that I trust a lot from the Mystic Aquarium has acknowledged to me that the pups she finds on Muskeget are more robust, are plumper, are healthier, and more survive than any other place she's been, whether Sable Island or Monomoy, which is small, or some places in Maine. And she can't figure it out any more than I can. I mean, I definitely can't. And I said, why would that be? And she didn't know.